I'm doing XYZ. And then it's just like, you're like, oh, it's and then it's like, oh, it's not because of this, it's like because you actually got something. It's like,
okay.
All right, we were ready to go. Okay.
Between TBC, babe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AMAKA and Nike Future Movement broadcast. I am your host, Kelechi Okafor, and I'm here today with some incredible panelists. I've got Lady Phyll over here. I've got Jocelyn Yeboah-Newton over here. I've got Lola Jaye over here, as well as Tanya Compas as well. So today we'll be talking about all things mental health, mental well-being, and what we can, all do together to kind of move it forward and move that conversation forward. I thought a great way to start would be for you to talk about yourselves a little bit and your experience of what it is, or how do you envisage mental wellness? What does it mean to you first, for us to start with mental wellness? Keeping it nice and succinct, because we've got lots of conversations to still have, but I think it's a great place for us to start. So, Lady Phyll, I'll start with you. What does mental wellness mean for you?
So, I guess mental wellness means for me being in my own space, having a safe and brave space for myself to be able to cry, to laugh. I always say mental wellness is more about having good mental wellness, because there's poor mental wellness that you don't always detect. So I guess it's safe spaces, it's my happy place, it's just being able to be me without restrictions. It's me being able to tap into others and just say, you know what, I just need you, because that creates a bit more of stability and guidance and wellness and supports and love around me. And I guess my greatest well-being is just having my daughter around me.
Thank you. And you mentioned about, being able to say, I need you, vulnerability, asking for help. You're head of upon the myriad of things that you do in terms of being an artist and a facilitator, and doing all of these things, you also provide in terms of being head of safeguarding at your organisation? Abianda. Abianda, having that. Safeguarding is important, being able to ask for help, but knowing that you're going to get that help as well is a major thing. We've seen so many different situations where safeguarding has not been in place and what that has meant. So what does mental wellness mean for you?
Interesting when you talk about safeguarding as a part of that. I guess there's two strands there for me. So mental wellness for me is being able to explore all the different facets of my being and be held in those spaces. Mental wellness is also knowing that I can be anchored by other people, so whether it's community or have people around me that if I'm not of my right self, of my well self, that there are trusted people that I can go to that can anchor me and support me in being able to access what I need to access. It's also about being able to be honest about what's going on for me without shame or guilt or fear. And also being able to tap into shadow work. But when we think about safeguarding as a part of that, for me, it's like we all have a duty to safeguard. Everybody has a duty to safeguard, us all. So it's something that requires a collective. Safeguarding as a part of, I guess, mental wellness is also knowing that you have trusted people. We've seen that not happen. Trusted people in positions of power or positions of authority that we know are going to be able to center your healing and your needs in that process. It should be a consensual process whereby your needs are being met, but also you're involved in what that safeguarding process needs to be and all the actions that need to take place in order to protect you. And when we see people not being involved in that process, that has a compounding impact on their mental wellness. So for me, the two are kind of interlinked in some ways, whereby there's a collective response. There's also an individual response, because I have a responsibility to take care of myself, and I have the autonomy to do that. But I also know that there are other people around me who also have responsibility to care for me and know that I can ask for that. And the same means that I am a person in a position of authority and power that also has responsibility to care for others, whether it's someone who's vulnerable, whether it's a young person or someone I love.
And that's beautiful, because there's a duality in that. Like, we are responsible for ourselves, but we're also responsible for other people. And that's that sense of community that comes through. And you talking about the consensual nature of this. Lola, you are a writer as well as a psychotherapist. Do you find that, you know, you've got your personal journey, I guess, of mental well-being as well, but then when you are working professionally, do you find that there is much consent in terms of the industry? Are people being invited to be participants in their own mental well-being, and, you know, in how they interact with that?
I think on a personal growth level, you have to be in charge of that. Because if we start looking to others to kind of validate that, we're going to be in trouble. So it's about starting with yourself. So how am I going to be okay? What does that look like? And for me, that looks like having balance and feeling centered, not just saying I'm centered, but just feeling it as well. And also I find that sometimes people can get this feeling of being overwhelmed. You know, we get that on a daily basis, really, especially in the work that we do, whatever job you do. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, there's this sense of not being in control. So to me, mental health well-being is about knowing that, okay, I don't have control over what's happening. And I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with that, because I can't control everything. I can't control what this person is saying to me, what this person's doing, what the world is doing around me. What can I control? And that just might be my space. How do I make that safe? How do I make it feel like I belong here? How do I remain centered?
Thank you. That idea of safety, I think, is super important. And that's really how we ended up connecting, Tanya, through your work with young girls, and you actively working to create safe spaces for them. What was the inspiration for that? Why specifically that group? And how does it link with your idea and your experience of mental well-being?
What was super important for me was to intentionally bring in people within my own network, which just so happened to be also intentionally Black women, to come and just, you know, deliver things around anything, whatever it may be. Like, even Kelechi come and do a tarot session with the girls, you know. And I think for me, it's because I know that I have grown into who I am by virtue of the community that I didn't grow up with. It's a community that I had to find. And it was hard to find that community, but it was through that I've become the person I am now. So I'm like, let me make the journey easier for my young people by introducing to people that have been like prominent in my life and have helped shift me, whether they know it or not, but in many different ways. So that's obviously where I came about bringing Kelechi, and I was like, because it's the second time I brought you in, I was like, yep, got to bring you in again. And I think for me, in terms of how I look at my own mental wellness, it's kind of a thing that I really have only really understood, I think, in the past few months. I think it's that since being diagnosed with ADHD and I'm finding out what that looks like, I think that I intentionally find and create spaces for myself, essentially, that also become space for young people, but where I can be unmasked, where I don't have to be like put on this like really, I didn't realize how heavy the mask of like conformity was, and trying to conform in this idea of like, I can't like fiddle, or I can't do this, or I can't, you know, all these things I can't do. And I think because of that, I actually lost who I was. And then, so now I'm like, I can find these spaces where I can be unmasked, which means I can be vulnerable. It means I can cry if I want to. It means I can actually, and through that, I've built a lot more stronger, intentional friendships and relationships with people, and also my young people as well, by virtue of it. So I think, yeah, I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing back then. I just knew I wanted to do it. But now I really understand the why, and I think understand that actually I was creating spaces that I needed for myself, but through the rest of my youth work.
Thank you. And I guess we can create various spaces, and, you know, we're having this conversation about, you know, mental wellness, about mental health. We talk about mental health, we talk about all of these things, but the things that people don't want to talk about is mental illness. Everyone seems to want to avoid that word. They want to find every other way to talk about things, but they don't want to talk about that word. And we're thinking about that in proximity also to movement, to physical activity, whilst taking into account that people experience sports, you know, physical movement, all of that, they experience it in very different ways. So we'll start with, you know, we've got this journey to go on in terms of this conversation and this discussion, but coming back to you, Tanya, you brought me in for a tarot session. Then we did I did a twerk session, and then we did like a 2-day workshop at my studio with pole dance.
Yeah.
And so you, of course, it's a sports charity that you're working with that's doing all of these things, but why specifically do you think sports is integral in mental well-being of girls and women?
I think that so many people look at sports as that past the age of like, again, 14, you can only proceed to do it if you are excellent at it, if you're an athlete, if you're going to make a career from it. And if you don't have that, then you do sports because you don't like your body, you want to lose weight, and you want to do things in a very unhealthy manner. And I think that people have forgotten the idea that sports is actually a great place to build community. It's a great place to make friends. So you may come, for example, like I put girls through random exercises, random sports, things they'll be like, they might say they hate football, but next thing you know, they actually love it because they've just synced it with maybe their PE teachers who maybe haven't made it the most fun experience, or have maybe made sports something that they only push the talented kids to do, and it's as opposed to just making it something for everybody. And I think that sports it breaks down the barriers because everyone is going to be sweaty, everyone's going to be looking awful by the end of the thing, everyone's going to be in uncomfortable positions. I think it was even with you. I think you've done a challenge. Yeah, because it was so funny in the twerk classes. Like there's some girls that again aren't used to moving their bodies, have been told they can't move their bodies. Even in 2018, I done an International Women's Day event. So I brought 100 girls from Lambeth together and a call from Hackney and Kelechi. You've done a twerk class for 100 girls, right? And it was so funny because the teachers there were really uncomfortable at the beginning because they, Kelechi getting the girls to move their bodies, but also teaching it in a way that's outside of a sexualized angle of it. And at the end, we had a DJ, we had Remy Bergs DJing, and the girls were, doing split in the middle, doing up the most. And the teachers afterwards were like, I thought the girls only done this at school to dance for the boys. I didn't know they just like to dance for it by themselves. And all the teachers said that. And I was like, this is the point of why we do this, because it's not for them. And also there were schools there, as in 5, 6 different schools, and they were all dancing together. They were competing against each other, like, who can do the best splits, who can do the best this. And to see them understand that this is a place to music, dance, movement is actually what brings people together and actually breaks down these ideas that these people are hugely different from you. Because you have a shared love of movement, dance. You can love one thing about it, but I think people forget that when the aim of sports, quote unquote, is to always to be great, to lose weight, to do whatever, and it's always linked to these connotations, a lot of people rob themselves of the joy they can find through movement and through sport, which is why I think a lot of people our age now are seeking spaces of it, even through your studios and stuff, to find that community, because we don't really have those spaces anymore outside of a work and career mind. So I think they're super important.
No, that is so true. And so for the rest of you, how do you find Lady Phyll, why are you making that face?
No, I just found what you said so interesting about the young girls, because I guess there's something for me. I'm of a particular generation whereby the way our bodies were policed. Yes. So I was a gymnast at the age of 9, and I was also a trampolinist, but I developed really quickly. So hips formed, breasts, and I felt uncomfortable about being in a space. So I then took myself away from that, because I guess it's that sexualization of how the body is looked at. And then from there was no sports whatsoever. But I just love that whole idea of, explore, be free. But it's easy to be free if you have that understanding of being free. Culturally, we're also told, cover up, sit this way, hold yourself that way, cover your chest. You don't have to show so much. Your front is showing. So, when you do explore and be expressive with your body, and you're running, you're jumping, you're on a treadmill, you become conscious if you're heavy-breasted, if you've got big hips and big bums. So, I guess, I'm probably now more excited as I've seen people in your classes, and I'm seeing young girls like my daughter expressing themselves through sport, playing football, and, a lot more body out the clothes than in the clothes, but I won't say anything about my daughter. And it's nice. It's nice. I wish I could be that free, but I'm still getting around my body not being policed in a particular way.
And I wonder that, does that stop for us though? Does the policing stop, or do we not defy the kind of constraints that's put on us by being policed in that way to keep doing the things that we want to do anyway? How has your experiences been, in terms of that?
Yeah, I find that's an interesting question, and just linking into this conversation around the freeness and whether policing stops. I don't think policing does stop. I think it's about us actually defying the policing and saying, this is who I am. So I started our Naked Truths, 5 years ago, and I was I was a life model for 7 years prior to that, and it was a big part of my journey. I didn't even realise it. I kind of fell into it. Had an aunt, I'm Ghanaian, and I have an aunt who was a life model. So we'd go to her house, and it'd be all of these amazing paintings of her naked body, and I used to just be enthralled by them and amazed because A, she looked like me, B, she was dark skinned and thick set, and it wasn't sexualized. It was beautiful, and also, you know, coming from a conservative Ghanaian family, that wasn't what you did. So it was also like this naughty aspect of like, wow, there's like naked pictures of myself. And as and in my late 20s, I had a really unhealthy relationship with my body. Some of that because of how it was being policed, some of the experiences that my body had went through, and I wanted to change that relationship. And so I spoke to my aunt around life modelling, and she talked about the process, what it was like for her. And for her, it was quite an empowering, liberating process, and it helped her to reclaim her body. So I thought, okay, let me enter into this and see what happens for me. And so in doing so, in life modelling, it wasn't just sitting there and modelling for other people, but there was this liberation that happened. I was able to own my body, even though you're still being objectified within a space and people are drawing you, and I was typically usually the only black person in that space too. But there was something quite liberating about owning the way that my body was positioned, being able to move my body how I choose to, and other people celebrating it. Then I also became a bit bored of sitting in this space and realising that I'm the only black person, and also being the female black objectified person in that space. So I created Our Naked Truths as a way to invite other black women and non-binary people to have their bodies celebrated, but also celebrate the stories that their bodies are carrying. Because, you know, when we think about the lack of freedom and we think about the policing of our bodies and we think about the trauma that our bodies hold, there's stories behind them that we feel ashamed to talk about, and that shame is sitting in our bodies. So the space was initially set up just as a space to reclaim what our bodies are holding, reclaim what stories were behind them, and also reclaim whatever our bodies look like. And it was so beautiful over time to see it was doing that and then some, because the more other people would come and see, you know, Tanya has also modelled at the space as well.
Yeah,
I'm so
got
thankful.
some words for you after tonight.
I'm ready. But there is just something about seeing somebody else being so willing to free up themselves in front of everybody and share their story and share their body without shame and being celebrated, that it inspires other people to do the same. And also listening and seeing that representation of knowing that person's body looks like mine. I may not see them on TV, I may not see them in certain magazines, but right now I can see they've got the same cellulite that I've got, their boobs hanging the same way, and they're celebrating themselves. So why can I not do the same? So I think for me, policing doesn't stop. We see that now. We see that amount of harm that women and girls are experiencing. We say that on a day-to-day basis, that women can't even just walk, women can't walk down the street without being touched or harassed, you know? So I think it's for us to defy what policing means, reclaim our spaces wherever we go, and I think being able to occupy a space within the freedom of what our bodies hold. And I feel like that's something that I've learned. Like, it's interesting, I was a life model and then doing Our Naked Truths and seeing the amount of people coming into that space and sharing their stories and bodies. But the more people were sharing, the more I was learning about what freedom means to me, and how I want to occupy space in my body. So yeah, I don't think it stops, but I feel like the work of defying it needs to continue, and is constantly happening, and we see it now.
In every moment it's shifting, isn't it? And I love that you brought up Our Naked Truths, because it's such a revolutionary practice, isn't it? Like, to invite people in to share their bodies. I think that if we think of the history of the black woman's body and how it has pretty much helped create the Western world as we know it, if we're like really, really going to go there, and what have we been left with, you know, in terms of how we view ourselves. And it's so interesting because, you know, I have the pole studio and I run a lot, and people kind of see me as like, oh, you know, she's a great personal trainer. I've done all of these things. And it seems like I was encouraging body confidence when my body looked the way that I wanted it to, right? Then when my body wasn't looking the way that I wanted it to, when I experienced pregnancy loss, suddenly my dynamic with my body shifted. And around that time is when you were emailing me. You were like, come and do a live, come and be a live. I said, Jocelyn, if you don't get out of my inbox. And I kept coming up with an excuse, and you weren't having it. You were like, why don't you just come and just draw then? And I was like, I don't want. But I really appreciated that, because you, through just asking me to come and do it, I was being faced with a very clear truth in that I wasn't comfortable. That was my naked truth. I wasn't comfortable with being naked any longer because my body wasn't the way that I had trained it to be and how I felt confident enough to present it to the world. And I think that that's where the true bravery starts. Like you say, that we're gonna keep being policed, but at what point do we reclaim what our bodies are and what they can do and surrender to that and live within that and also work from that place of celebration? But do you come across that in terms of psychotherapy, seeing people who, on the surface, they might come up with these reasons for why they're doing something, but this is happening underneath?
Absolutely. And I mean, just going back to the whole gym thing, I mean, we've all got gym stories. You go in a certain outfit, you know, you got to wear the tight yoga pants and whatever, a tight bra top, and there's somebody there that's going to come on to you or make a lewd comment. And it can become quite isolated because you just don't want to go. So with lockdown happening and obviously not going to the gym anymore, you know, myself included, obviously, a lot of us, we started to do exercises at home, you know, in front of the TV, in front of YouTube and so forth. So I find that working with people, especially with depression, that is a prescription right there. Exercise, you know, regular exercise. You know, we know the story about the endorphins, you know, we know that the hormones, the good hormones that are, you know, that are expressed through that, but also the consistency of doing it. You know, sometimes you might not want to get out of bed. But if you know that, okay, I've got to go for a run at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., that might just get you out. It might not. You know, let's face it might not. But there's this consistency with that, which is really important. So lockdown, I think, made that easier when working with that, because it's something that could be done at home without the so-called prying eyes, the policing that goes on with that, and any issues that the person may have with their body. It's just there with them in that room. And I know it doesn't sound ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. You work with what you've got, basically. So that's how I found that. And I think part of that is me as well. I don't like going to the gym, you know, because I know what's going to happen. So I was quite happy to, you know, work in front of YouTube, so forth, you know? So yeah, probably not the answer that I should be giving as, I'm just being real.
It's your answer, and this is, I think that's why we're having this discussion though. It's about us being real, because I think that we've seen so many different types of conversations around mental health and things like that and mental well-being, like we said, where, you know, things are talked around and it's like, there is a way of still talking about something in a way that we are looking forward, but you know, like the Sankofa bird, we can be moving forward while also still looking back. Like what we have, you know, what we have experienced also informs where we go from here. Cultures and mental wellness. We all have, you know, a variety of cultures and backgrounds and things. How do you think conversations around mental health, but specifically mental illnesses or mental illness, how do you think those conversations have been in communities, and are they changing?
No.
I
think it's interesting. I think for myself, like, obviously I'm mixed race, my mum's white, dad's black, my dad's black British, he's born here, and my dad's as a black man doesn't talk about emotions, that's just off the cards. My mum, and it's interesting where people always put white parents on a pedestal as though they understand everything, which isn't the case. So like, it's an element where like mental health was never something that was discussed in my household. And I think even, you know, kind of, it was only really when I got my ADHD diagnosis that I really realised, it's actually still, my family still aren't at that point yet. They are now, but at that point they weren't in the understanding, because they were like, so I've got ADHD, they're like, we're trying to question the validity of the diagnosis. But where did you get diagnosed? Who done it? Was it a real doctor? Was it this? Because they still centered themselves in the diagnosis as a failure for my mother in particular, that I have got ADHD. Because ADHD and the way it's looked at is still linked to, you know, white boys throwing chairs at teachers, as opposed to, and I think people look at ADHD in a sense of like, it's you know, all the time, but actually a lot of it's emotional, mental side of things that actually is the hardest to navigate, especially for women, that which impacts women more. And I say no in terms of why I don't think it's moved forward, is because obviously through working with my young people, and predominantly of the young people that work at Exist Loudly are of Black African backgrounds, and they are still, and the conversation is still hitting a glass ceiling. And it's more so, I think the unfortunate thing is that now we are parenting our parents to learn about their own mental health and to understand it, or at least to confront it in a way or form, by virtue of them seeing us go to therapy, or say, hey, actually, I'm feeling depressed today, or actually my anxiety is quite bad, and us setting our own boundaries it's like once our parents are able to decenter themselves from our boundaries and from the time or space we may need from ourselves and look at it as a way of preserving ourselves, I think I see at least with my parents that they are now looking at ways to preserve themselves as well. Maybe it's not therapy, maybe it's not whatever, but I think I see that same with my young people. They're like, my mum doesn't understand this and that, and I'm like, well, you have to understand it for yourself first, and hope that through you creating practices for yourself, that your parents, they may not get it, they may not have the right words to say it or to acknowledge it, but they will see changes. But I don't think, as I said, it's not, I don't think changes are happening in the grand scale of things, because I think there's still so much stigma. I think there's still a lot of the mainstream media reflections around mental health aren't reflective of our communities at all. I think they're often coming from a white, cis, heterosexual British lens, and therefore doesn't take into all the different facets of community that exist within. Even when we talk about Black mental health, it's always spoken about with a certain lens, and it doesn't encapsulate people that may have experienced homelessness, people that may be experienced, trans young people, it may not be experienced people, people that are going through childbirth, all these different ideas, and it's not moving as quickly as it should, because those who have the power to change things are still refusing to acknowledge people within our communities, and I think which is why the ownership, I think, is on ourselves, which is an unfortunate thing, because there's only so much we can all do to inflict the change, I guess, that needs to happen.
I guess, and I really agree with you to a point, because I feel that young queer people especially have taught me a lot more about well-being, mental health, poor and ill mental health. Through the work that I do with UK Black Pride, and I'm talking community-based, we ran a survey which was really asking the community questions. They told us we wouldn't have no more than 500 people fill it out. We had over 1,500, and the majority of them happened to be young. And they were telling us that, of course, social media has helped, because those who feel safe and brave enough to be able to tell their story, it's highlighted there. Then the fact that you do have some funding, not enough. You're absolutely right, not enough funding. It's it feels like we're able to talk about it a bit more, but it's breaking down the family concept of where we stayed silent. I was not allowed to cry. What are you crying for? Even if you do get a bit of a beating, what are you crying for? So all of that, that trauma that you talked about, we didn't find ways to unpack it. And when you don't find those ways, then that's when it becomes really, really poor and really, really bad. So I guess for us at UK Black Pride, what we've done, we've made sure that through the survey, we've received money that we then disperse back to our communities who are already doing that brilliant work. We've seen how it's intensified. We've seen how, funding has dwindled out. So the ways that we are wanting to help communities, our communities, is to make sure we redistribute the monies and the funding that we have so that they can carry on doing that work. And I guess, as I said to you, young queer people, for me, people like yourself, Tanya, have taught me an awful lot about, let's talk about this. Let's also have the intergenerational conversations that we don't often have around the table. I want to be able to say to you, well, the reason why I may have this mask on is because I don't know how to peel it back because of how I am. But then when I see how you are with community, I'm like, damn, I can strip this off, because you know what? It feels empowering, but it is a learning and an unlearning process before you can even start getting to that healing. But I think social media, young people, especially young queer people, and funding. If you don't have the funding and the resource, it makes it 20 times harder to address some of these things. And importantly, Black queer therapists and Black therapists.
Yes. Yeah, no, that is super important. And, you've touched on so many things there that I want us to come back to shortly, because talking about not being able to take that mask off, the stereotype of the strong Black woman, we have to come back there. But another pertinent thing that you mentioned was about funding. And I think that oftentimes we've talked about some kind of fluffy conversations that happen around mental health and mental illnesses specifically. And people almost tell you that affirmations and positive thinking is what gets you out of it, and while ignoring systemic and institutional reasons that you could find yourself in these states in the first place. So of course, funding, money I have to make. Like, money is important. like money is also important in this. Like having a roof over your head, like being warm at night, like these things matter. But you know, that's what I wanted to, you know, put to you both. What do you think in terms of our cultures? And you know, you really lit up when we were talking, when Lady Phyll mentioned about the intergenerational conversations. Like the healing isn't linear. So do we go forward to heal ourselves to, or in a way, come back?
I feel like it's a parallel process to me. I lit up because I've recently been experiencing some of what we would call intergenerational healing, but it also just reminded me of, we've had some sessions at Our Naked Truths, because a big part of it is just being able to bear yourself in all that you are. And I've always been quite curious about, cause predominantly most of the community of Our Naked Truths is kind of black and brown, queer, people aged between 16 and 35. That's kind of the core group. But then we also had some other women on the peripheries who are like in their 50s. And I've been really inviting those women to come and share their bodies. We had a couple of sessions, one namely I remember, which was phenomenal, Karen Arthur, who was talking about, this amazing woman, and she came and shared her body, and her process was really about sharing what menopause had been like, but also what mental health had been like for her own experience. She talks quite openly on her platform, or did then, and it was really interesting because, you know, most of the people in the room were younger than her, and what I saw happening was that she was a reflection of their experiences, but just from a different age group, and vice versa. And I think that part is so important, you know, forgetting that there is a parallel process. We do need to, for the elders, it's also being able to go back and also confront some of those difficult truths around complicitness, around silencing, around shame, also unlocking the doctrine of religion that has also informed the silencing of mental health and mental illness, you know, thinking, oh, we'll send that person to church, you know, this person's dealing with psychosis, and thinking that going to church is going to heal them and that's it, you know, having to go back and face those really uncomfortable truths. But then also for us, while we have access, also we have to understand that for the younger generations, that we have been able to benefit from the privilege of being able to access tools, resources, have these conversations that our elders didn't have. So there's a parallel process going on for both of us, actually. And I feel like within that there needs to be compassion. Yeah, so like self-compassion for the things I didn't know, compassion for my elders for not being able to have the tools, the resources, the space to confront, because also we can't forget that they were also dealing with issues within the systemic oppressive structure, which means there was no space to even think about what mental health was. You had no space to think about your trauma. You had to pick up and go, you know? So having compassion around that, but then also having some boundaries around where there may be limitations in that healing. So for me, it's been quite powerful. Like recently I was invited to bring my mother for a discussion around motherhood by a friend of mine called LCIO, who is an incredible artist, community builder, just an incredible human. And it's a really powerful conversation. You know, I've had my own struggles with my mental health throughout my years, and my mum has been a part of that. And we've never really talked about what that journey was like for her. And it was so interesting for her to share what it was like, and for her to apologize to me. She apologized to me, you know, like I didn't expect that. I actually had gone through the process of forgiveness, because I understand that I overstand. My mum didn't have the tools to understand what was going on. She didn't have the tools or the resources. And then to look back and for her, in her reflection and listening to my journey, be like, the first thing I want to do is apologize, because if I know what I know now, I would have done things differently. So as much as I appreciate on a wider scale, there is so much change that needs to happen. There's so much kind of intergenerational learning that will inform the collective healing. There are microcosms of this happening, because the younger generation are becoming the reflections of the change that the elders need to see. You know, like it's true. Like we are becoming that, and we need to own that. That in our healing, we're encouraging our elders, and also understanding that there are some elders that may not. There are some elders that won't have the space to go there, and that is okay. We have compassion for them, but also boundaries where it might be harmful, where, you know, some of the language they might be used might be feeling oppressive or limiting or harmful in your experience. We have boundaries, but yeah, I feel like there's a really powerful parallel process going on. And even within that, you know, funding, yes, we talk about funding, but it's because, you know, it's so crucial that now, because there are we don't see many black therapists. There's the Black and Asian Therapists Network. We have small cosms, Black Minds Matter. We had the Black Women's Project that lasted up until last year because we ran out of funding. We've got the Beehive, Frontline Therapists. There are other spaces that are providing black practitioners from all different modalities to serve the community, but they're also community funded, most of them. We're having to fund our own therapy. We're having to fund our own collective healing because we're not accessing the money or the tools, or we're not accessing long-term therapy. Even our project, the Black Women's Therapy Fund, we could only provide therapy for 3 months. That's what we could afford. Ideally, with this level of trauma and experiences that we've had to navigate, we need for at least a year each, and not always being able to access that on the NHS. So I think that's to me, accessing funding for therapy is like a form of reparations. It's a form of reparations, and I encourage that all of the brands out there, to be looking at projects within the community who are doing the work and fund those projects. Fund those projects.
Yeah, we need to talk about the people who are doing the work as well. That brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, the strong black woman narrative. How in your lives have you found that? Maybe you've wanted help, or maybe, you wanted to tell somebody that this is going on, but that trope of that strong black woman, and sometimes even the angry black woman, has stopped you from saying what you need and, what would help you to feel safer. I'm looking at you, Lady Phyll.
I know. And I don't know why, but I'm really trying to hold it in right now as we're talking, because this is, it's such a real, this is our lives. Yeah, and we can laugh and kiki, and I love it because we also need that, but it's our lives. And you ask, where do we go to next? What do we do? And before I even come to that strong black woman, I guess my job is I work internationally, and I work with decision makers, policy makers, those that walk through the corridors of power, the power that we don't have. And it is about lobbying for the funding. It is about finding ways to tackle those systemic and structural inequalities from so many different angles, whether it's about young people and homelessness, whether it is about the way young people are sexualized, whether it is about the lack of funding for therapists. We've got to find the other way as well, because those who are in power, regardless of whether we like them or we don't like them, we have to tackle them because they hold the purse strings and they hold the decision-making power on what we do next. And if we don't tackle them in the House of Lords, in the House of Parliament, it makes our community work 20 times harder. And somebody said to me, you can't just do working with the House of Lords and with the parliamentarians. It's got to be about community grassroots. I come from civil society, community grassroots, but I'm telling you now, there is nothing more powerful than changing the trajectory of an MP's mindset when you know that a vote has to take place on our bodies and our lives and our minds and what happens to us. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we've got to use that avenue as well.
On every level,
When we're talking about fighting inequalities, we've got to use that avenue as well. Let's not forget about it.
Or ignore it, because I think that's what it is. It's kind of like, they're not going to do what we want, so let's just ignore. But you're right, we have to include even that facet in all the number of things that we're doing.
Yeah, but strong black women, I guess, I've always been told my whole working career, and I've been working for the last 26 years for so many different institutions, and oh, you're so strong. Oh my gosh, you're brilliant. And I guess the more people think that you're strong is the less likely they're willing to accept when you have a moment that is less than strong. And I'm not just talking about those institutions, I'm talking even amongst us. I want to be held by my sisters, my people, when I'm feeling tired. And often we're all going through so much that we don't find time to be compassionate. We don't find time to be kind. We don't find time to love on one another. And I guess you then just fall in line and just have to keep on going until you drop and you burn out. And then everyone at your funeral, your wake, or whatever it is, oh my gosh, she was amazing, they were amazing. And that's not where we want to be.
No, I want my flowers while I'm alive. Yeah.
Or as you said, if you don't get them,
I'm going to grow them.
I love that.
Like
I've never heard that.
I saw it on Instagram.
It's yours now, right?
It's mine now. No, but it's so important. Because I've been waiting. I feel like that a lot of us end up waiting to be celebrated. And I read that, like, you know, while you're waiting for people to give you your flowers, you should grow your own. And this is what we're doing in spaces like this, growing our own flowers. Like, what do we do next while waiting for society to bring us the things? How do we grow our own things? But in terms of what has your experiences been of that kind of strong black woman narrative?
I mean,
no, please go first.
It is the most problematic phrase ever when it comes to black women's mental health. When I was younger, I owned it. That was my mantra. You know, I'm strong. It's me against the world. Didn't get me very far. It is so problematic in that sense that you're not allowed to be soft. You know what? Sometimes I want to be soft. And there's another term that I use even today, and I make no apologies for it. You know, if I call you a black queen, that's great. But you know what? Sometimes I don't want to be a black queen. I want to be a princess. You know? I want to be a princess. I want to wear a pink dress and I want to wear a tiara. But most importantly, I want to be soft. And I would quite like it if you appreciated my softness. It's not about me being hard-faced and having to take on the world. I'm tired.
And why? That's it. Because we would say that, wouldn't we? Like, I'm a strong black woman. It's me against the world. But why did we end up in a situation where it's you against the world? It shouldn't have ever been that way. There are some things that we've normalised as a way of remaining resilient when actually they can be obstacles as well.
And internalising it as an identity.
Yes.
And I've definitely done that. I've spent years of feeling like I needed to develop this strong persona because that was going to help me navigate life. That was going to define my trajectory of my career. That was going to define the community that I had around me. But as you said earlier, it doesn't take you very far because also what compounds the veneer of the strong black identity or black woman identity behind this becomes layers and layers and layers and layers of pain and vulnerability that doesn't really have an outlet to go because there's nowhere to share that because you've got this veneer up top. So all that happens is this almost like an implosion. It doesn't take you very far. And so I think it's interesting when and it's also, I understand why that has happened. I understand and I've got compassion for myself around that. And I understand, other people that I see that are wearing that identity boldly in the workplace and feeling like there isn't space to be soft. They can't show when they've made a mistake because God forbid if people see that they've made a mistake, they may get fired, they may get looked down on, they may not get that opportunity. So I completely understand that. We have to look at this from the lens of classism, racism and patriarchy, which creates like a triple consciousness. Think about it, you're having to go into a space and think from three different lenses, the lens of patriarchy, then the lens of racism, then also the lens of class within your identity, and then trying to build up a wall in order to tackle it. That's exhausting, So like, I understand while it's there, I also understand how problematic it is, but what I'm loving now is that we are starting to own how problematic that strong black woman identity is. We're talking about it. We're having this conversation. We're bringing our vulnerability into different spaces. I'm loving this new line that the young G's are, I'm not really young, I'm like 38, so I'm not technically young. I'm pushing. I'm soft life. Not everyday trauma. Not everyday trauma. We know what our intergenerational trauma is. We are aware of our own experiences of trauma. We're aware of having to unpack the layers around adultification, hypersexualization. These are all deeply entrenched within our experiences. That's all trauma. That's all sitting in the body. So for me, reclaiming my own identity is getting rid of the strong black woman. I don't want to be strong. I want soft life. I actually want soft life. I want to be able to cry and be held in my softness. I want to be able to be in spaces, and Our Naked Truths have showed me that so much. The way we hold each other. We have talked about everything. Any type of trauma, any type of mental health issue, we have talked about so much in that space. We've seen people implode in tears, but it's been held because actually those tears have been celebrated. And that's another thing around you know, when we have showed our tears, we've also been met with shame, or we've been met with guilt, or even fear. People don't know how to manage it. Oh my God, the strong one's crying. If they're crying, what do I do? You know, like, we need to start encouraging more spaces where we can be held. And I think that is slowly happening. We're slowly starting to see people being honest about their journeys on social media. I mean, that's not entirely for me. I don't want to put everything up there. But like, it's beautiful that I know that my nieces can look online and know that there are other people that look like them, you know, who are sharing their vulnerabilities. The same people that you look up to because, you know, they've got an amazing following also shed tears because it's hard sometimes. And that doesn't take away from their strength. Actually, it's a part of their beautiful, multifaceted prism of being, you know? So I feel like there are shifts there. We need to talk about it more and also take accountability of when we're also, because we all tap into that old behavior, isn't it? That I've noticed myself, it's almost like an old addiction. Like, I tap into it sometimes of having to create this veneer and realise, no, that's not what it is right now. I'm not good today, actually.
How do we make that easy, though? How do we make these spaces easier for us to talk about it? Right now, I feel safe and I feel comfortable that, you know, a tear's fallen and I don't feel any shame or guilt. But I'll go into a different setting and trust me, I will not cry. You will believe that I am cold, stony faced and I don't move because I don't feel comfortable. How do we create that change?
To sustain a Black-run organisation that are working firsthand with the trauma and the experiences of Black people is exhausting. And when you don't have the funding that can help you sustain or have big teams, so you know, have big teams to help you continue the work, and you're also having recognition trauma of some of the experiences that are brought up in the space, because you too are a Black person who've navigated trauma, you know, it gets to the point where you burn out, or there needs to be breaks, and then also that fear of, oh crap, we haven't been running for a certain amount of time. You know, we don't have the content, and if brands don't see the content, they won't fund us. And you know, forgetting that actually in those breaks, maybe thinking about what did that person need, and in those breaks, maybe there's opportunities for organisations to come in and say, what can we do to help you sustain your project? And that's what I would love to see more of, sustainable funds.
And I guess as we come to a close with all of this, because there's still so much, like, we could be here for days because there's so much. I mean, in my mind, I'm just like, I could see where we could go, but it's like, okay, we stay here and we stay with this. But I love that idea about sustaining spirit. As we close on that, then, what would you say is a tip for how we go about sustaining spirit, sustaining community, sustaining spirit or sustaining community, whichever one speaks to you the most? Like, what is the thing that you leave us with? Because we're all doing things. UK Black Pride, Our Naked Truths, like your work as a writer as well as being a psychotherapist exists loudly. Like, we've got so many things that's happening. We know that we're going to take this away and do something, but what would you kind of offer up and be like, you know what, I leave you with that and get on with it?
I think for me it would just be, I think my greatest learning was to go back to what I enjoyed most, which was back when I used to deliver stuff at the Generation Storm in Brixton, which is stop overcomplicating things. So I used to try and, you know, if anything was out there, I tried to do the most. You know, everything has to be the best. But actually, I've gone back to just taking them out for lunch, just going to the theatre, things that really and find the connection. So Black Ticket Project, to provide free theatre tickets. Like, I'm taking a group of young people to see Get Up, Stand Up with Bob Marley. And things like this that I love, it brings me joy. I'm not working, I'm just bringing them there. And it's spaces in which they can, and myself as well, and my staff, can just have a break and just pause and press pause and lose yourself into another experience. And I think that's helped sustain my spirit, is by virtue of not overcomplicating things and knowing that sometimes the bare minimum is actually, that is that one drop in the ocean for a young person that will change and shift their whole entire life. Just without having to do so much, just kind of really honing on what is it that you love doing, focus on the work that you love doing, and then create the spaces for that. And the people that love the same things will come and they'll find you, rather than trying to do things that you think other people aren't doing. Because that is where you'll lose yourself, and that's where you'll lose your joy, which means you won't ever sustain the work.
Oh, that is a word. Come through. Preaching, Tanya. Damn. All right, take it easy. I love it. Thank you for that. I needed that word. My God. What about you, Lady Phyll? Because I see you just chilling. It's like I'm picking on Lady.
Do I seem calm?
Yeah, you're just so relaxed. I'm glad.
I'm quite a calm and composed person because I know what my purpose is.
Amen.
And I know what I have to do. And I'm listening to each one of you and feeling so nourished by what I'm hearing. I guess for me, I'd love to see, and I've always talked about a black almanac, a black yellow pages, because all of these amazing organisations that are doing great work that people don't know about, like IMCON, like Micro Rainbow, you know, people don't know how to even reach them. And, you know, I just want to say, we got to remember our refugees and asylum seekers, especially even our queer refugees and asylum seekers, and the traumas that their bodies have even gone through to get to a particular country of safety. So I'd love to see that Yellow Pages. Okay. But what I'm going to continue to do is fight from the inside out within those institutions that are difficult, problematic and challenging, in order for us to start breaking down how we are seen in the eyes of those who hold power. And one day we'll be able to dismantle the whole bureaucratic, antiquated system, and that's what I want to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Oof. Lady Phyll for Prime Minister, I'm ready. I'm not even joking, I'm ready.
Skeletons in my closet.
Love that, not me, baby, not me.
Oh my gosh, my mum will send me back to Ghana.
What about you, Jocelyn?
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, for me, it's around what really resonated for me is sustaining spirit, because in order for me to sustain, if I'm sustaining my spirit, then I can help sustain community.
Yes.
And where I'm at now in my careers and training, I'm training as a psychotherapist as well, in my second year. I've really been peeling back the layers and deconstructing the identity of the strong black woman and what it means to hold space and be a facilitator and actually hold myself and go back to the basics of asking Jocelyn what she needs and being able to ask loved ones, this is what I need from you in order to support me in my journey. So I think for me, around sustaining spirit, it's just going back to the core basics of who I am and stripping all of it back, knowing that as I reconstruct, then I'm going to be able to sustain community and put out in the best way that I need to. So for me, it's, sustaining spirit to inform sustaining community.
Amen. That's it. You're that fountain that gives, you know, and brings the life to the things. Yeah, that's so true. Thank you. Lola?
Yeah, and I think following from that sustaining spirit for me means what I'm doing now, and I'm in a blessed position where I write books. I'm on my 7th book now.
Come on!
Stop. Wait, your book's here.
We'll leave that there for
Where was I? And the theme of the books is really about exposing history. I'm a historical fiction writer, and we know that our history's not always been pretty. But I also like to add that, you know, our history is not just about trauma and colonization and slavery and so forth. That's just a small chapter of it. Exactly. But I also like to show that in my writing, and also I like to show healing in it as well. This is not me just doing trauma porn. I'll show that part, but there has to be a resolution, and that resolution is always going to be joy. So I get to construct my own world in that sense. I first acknowledge that there is trauma and there is racism and there is so much hell, but also there is heaven. There is so much joy. There is black love. There is laughter. So I get the privilege of being able to do that. Whilst in the other job, I get to work with real people. So you get imaginary people and real people. And they get to combine somewhere. And I think that's such a privilege that I've been given. And that balances me and that sustains me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That is a word about the imagination and us being able to reframe and recalibrate all the things that have been done onto us by using the power of our imagination. And I think that's one of the things about working the way that we do in the society that we work in, that we try to navigate, is that if we are worked to the bone, then we have no time for rest, thus we have no time for imagination. And actually, imagination is the thing that creates the world that we want to be in, you know, and that's why giving us these things, seeds, that you read the book and it's there in your mind now, like that there could be a different outcome to all of this. But no, so thank you for that. Oh, take it easy. In terms of sustaining spirit, I think for me, it is, as you say, it's about imagination. Like, I love experiencing tarot. I love experiencing traditional Yoruba spirituality. Through those things, through retracing my steps in this physical experience, I've been able to discover so much more. I always talk about, for me, like, I love running. And, you know, sometimes I'm careful about when we have conversations about movement and wellness, that it can sound really ableist because it comes down to what I'm privileged to be able to do, right? But there's also breath work. There's breath work. There's so much power in stillness. And I find that there's prayers in every moment, like showing up as holy as you can. And then when you're trying to show up as holy as you can, you notice all of the environments that don't want you to show up holy as you can. So you shut down. So as much as I can, I really honor myself in that way. Like, how can I be as much of myself while honoring the selfhoods of everybody else around me, like really listening, really paying attention to like what is being said, who are they introducing me to in themselves. That sustains my spirit, and thus it's like, it's regenerative because then you can sustain others as well. And so many people, I guess based on a podcast, based on a pole studio, people tell me how much I've helped them get through really hard times. And while I don't want to wear that as a burden, the only way I can wear it as an achievement is if I know that there's space for me to offload my own burdens. So, you know, that's what sustains me, being able to go to therapy, being able to learn about the human condition through the tarot cards, like seeing all 78 different things and interpreting them, because also I'm trying to strengthen my intuition. We're taught so much to not trust ourselves, that a lot of what we're actually doing is learning to be in relationship with ourselves. That's really what we are doing in different ways. And I find that these practices help me to trust myself more. And you can only be confident in something you trust. You know, you can only vouch for something that you trust. And for me to be able to vouch for myself, true self-confidence, I also have to trust myself. Like, oh, if I feel like I want to stay in bed today, trusting that that is the right decision that I've made. If I want to go out into the world, trusting that I've made that right. But a lot of times we've been doing things from a place of like dissonance and just moving, like letting the body move beyond and letting the spirit and the mental state stay behind, and letting them find some kind of like calibration, some kind of amalgamation, some kind of equilibrium. I found that it's allowed me to have a more peaceful life, even when to the rest of the world it looks like maybe I'm getting lots of like attack or abuse online. I actually have a state of stillness because I've discovered that there is my purpose, as you mentioned, so I can be fine in the knowledge that I'm being sustained in so many different ways and I'm being nourished from so many different wells. And then there's the ultimate eternal well. And that is enough for me. I don't have to be thirsty, waiting for the world to nourish me, you know? So, yeah, that's... Well, okay, on that note. And then, well, that is it from us. Thank you so much, Lady Phyll. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you so much, Lola. Thank you so much, Tanya. I've been Kelechi Okafor, and this has been AMAKA and the Nike Futures Movement broadcast. I hope that you've enjoyed our discussion because we were talking about all of the things. And I don't know if we'll see you soon, but you'll see yourself. Thank you.